Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the House Government Operations Committee. I call this meeting to order. This Tuesday, February 21st, 8:05 a.m. At this point, it would be appropriate to entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Representative Peterson.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from
15
the 15th of February, 2023.
That motion is in order. The motion is to approve minutes from 15 February 2023. Is there any discussion of that motion? Seeing none, I'll place it. All those in favor of approving the minutes from February 15th, 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I rule that motion passes unanimously. On to the agenda. We'll start with House Bill 393, primary ballot requirements by Representative Tusher. Directly after, we're going to change order Senator Buxton on SB 168. First substitute will be presented second, and then the rest will go in order. Representative Tusher, House Bill 393, primary ballot requirements. The time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a flyer here. Do you mind if I get that out to the committee?
No. Maybe if your intern wants to grab him or my intern.
He's in a different committee meeting waiting for, but mine.
Somebody go grab those for him.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill, House Bill 393. So let me just start and say that when I was 17 years old, I was in a AP political science class. And come March, we had an assignment to go and attend a neighborhood caucus meeting. And this was my first really foray. My parents weren't particularly political. I hadn't really heard about the process before, but I had that assignment and I showed up, and it was at someone's house, and I kind of sat in the back and listened and was interested as they discussed different political issues that were happening at the time. And when they went around to vote for delegates, someone, kind of an older gentleman in the front row, raised his hand. He said, I nominate that young guy in the back to be a delegate. And though I hadn't planned on being a delegate, I did get elected that day and had a chance to go to the county convention. And really that was my first experience in politics that sort of led a path to where I am today, and was a really instrumental moment in my life. And so because of that, I've always been a fan of the caucus convention system. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And what we've seen in the last 10 years, really with some of the unintended consequences of SB 54, is some of the tarnishing of that great process that we have. One thing that we've seen is lower caucus participation. And I think that's mainly has taken place because, one, with a lot of candidates collecting signatures, especially at the major statewide races, there's less excitement from the individual members of a neighborhood to show up on caucus night because they know that it doesn't really matter that those candidates are going to be on the primary ballot anyway. Secondly, the candidates themselves, especially those with a lot of resources, because they've put resources into gathering signatures, they've put a lot less resources into getting people to show up on caucus night, and that's led to some lower numbers of caucus participation than we've seen in the past. In fact, in 2012, we had some of the highest caucus participation. I think over 53,000 members across the state in the Republican caucuses showed up. And then, our caucus participation has continued to go down since then. Another unintended consequence has been this cottage industry of signature gathering that I don't think was ever the intent of what the legislature wanted. That they were trying to set signature levels to make sure that people had a base of support, but what that's really turned into is a pay-to-play type system where the majority of the candidates just pay for services to go out and collect those signatures. And then third, and maybe what's most unintended with this is we actually have prolonged primary races with nearly the same outcome. I think that was one of the concerns this legislature had when it came up with the compromise with SB 54, was that it hoped that it would ensure that if you had more extreme members of a convention, that then they would be able to fix that in a primary election. I think the opposite has really happened in most of the cases that you look at. Regardless of the convention result, the primary result mirrors it fairly closely. A couple really good examples. I was just looking over the weekend. You could look at, see here, county clerk race, right? The county clerk in Weber County received 78% of the caucus vote, and then in the primary gets 67% of the primary vote. Another example would be in House District 10 in Weber County. You had the candidate there get 77% of the vote. In a primary, they get 56% of the vote. I should have these ready. Davis County clerk, similar situation. They got 87% of the vote in convention, 62% of the vote in the primary. And so what this means is the result is exactly the same, but now you've forced these candidates into a race where they have to expend more resources, they have to get more people involved in the process to go and talk, and they get beat up in that process. And that was really the entire intent of the caucus convention system from the beginning, was this ability to vet candidates, and if there wasn't a clear consensus winner, then you move it on to the primary where everyone gets the chance to participate. But if we're vetting candidates and there is a clear winner, and then they have to go to a primary anyway, and the primary voters vote the same way, then we're really losing a lot of economies that we could have otherwise. And so that's what we've tried to do with House Bill 393, is to find a compromise where we can maintain the current dual path to the primary ballot, but also provide political parties the ability to opt in to a nomination method that allows candidates with overwhelming support at convention to win the nomination outright. And the way that we do that is under this bill, when a party is opted in and a candidate receives at least 70% of the vote, then it eliminates the other candidates that had gathered signatures. This doesn't require any minimum number of vote for a particular candidate in convention. They could receive 0% of the vote. If they've gathered signatures, they would be on that primary ballot as long as no other candidate receives over 70%. A couple things that I'll add to that. One, we've been working closely with Count My Vote to try to find a compromise on this. I think they recognize some of these challenges that we've had and unintended consequences to the SB 54 bill that was passed back in 2014. And so as we move forward, we're trying to find where that consensus is, where we can, again, encourage lots of participation in the caucus convention process, while at the same time allowing for the general public an ability to weigh in when there isn't a clear a winner. And let me just add in closing here, the benefits of the caucus convention system that I think are really important. One, especially in the political environment that we're in today, it increases political and social engagement. It gets neighbors out and talking to one another and discussing political issues in ways that you don't have in just a straight primary election. Secondly, it enables opportunities for candidates that don't have significant resources to be able to get involved and run for political office. And I know that I fall into that camp. If we just had a straight primary system, there's no way that I would have the resources to serve in this office and to get elected. But it allows a small group to be able to vet candidates, figure out if they are the right choice for that area, without having to expend thousands and thousands of dollars to get on the ballot. And lastly, it provides for a better candidate vetting process. It really is one of the few, and if you look at other states that don't have a caucus convention system, most voters will never have the opportunity to look their elected officials in the eye. They'll never have a chance to really ask them a question. We're unique in Utah, and this is a special system that takes those people, especially at statewide races and gets regular people the ability to get involved, to ask questions, to get answers to their questions, to really vet them out and see if they're the right choice for that position. And so for that, I would strongly urge that this committee recommend House Bill 393, that we can move on, continuing to work with Count My Vote to find the right compromise here that will, again, protect that dual path process that we have and that allows for greater participation, while at the same time, if we have overwhelming support, avoiding the costs that come with having to run that primary election. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one quick clarifying question. We'll go to the committee. I just want to make certain, there is a substitute. Were you speaking to the first sub or no?
I was, and Mr. Chair, if you would allow me just a minute to explain the difference.
If you wouldn't mind clarifying the difference.
There's three small tweaks in the first substitute. The first one is that it just clarified some of the language to ensure that this is an opt-in for the parties. These are private entities, and we want to make sure that to protect their own ability to associate and individuals to associate with the political parties. So we wanted to make sure that language is clear. This is only when a party opts into the system. The second thing that it does is that it instructs the clerks to add an asterisk to those that have won the caucus convention system to give more information and education to voters. And the third thing that it does is that it clarifies when that 70% threshold needs to be met. So the original bill said something like when at least one candidate has over 50% of the vote. In talking with the different parties and how they actually run it, we thought it would be cleaner to just say in the last round where someone was eliminated in the round before, which is typically the process that they follow.
Okay, thank you. Representative Thurston?
Thank you. So just to clarify on that last point, if I may then. So if there are two candidates, one who is signature only and one who is convention only, the convention only candidate obviously is going to get 100%, but since nobody got eliminated, they would both be on the primary ballot.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the language exactly.
Yeah, because it says it's only if there's a round in which somebody is eliminated, and so if there's only one candidate, nobody would be eliminated, and so you'd have both of them would go.
Yeah, that might be the case. Let me just look at the language and see. Let's see here.
Representative Thurston, do you have that line?
I don't. But it was in the first sub. It was the section that he was referring to that said if that this only applies after the round in which someone is eliminated. And that when I read that, I thought, well, the way then to avoid this whole thing is to not go to convention, and so I wonder if maybe that's the unintended consequence of this, is that we encourage people to not go to convention, just to concede that Doug Welton's going to be the convention candidate, and everybody else just does signatures, and we start right back where we are.
Yeah, so this would be in. Let me look at this line here. I think it's starting in lines 540 in the substitute. Yeah, I'll have to talk to the drafting attorney just to ensure. I would say the intent of this would be to say that if a candidate gets 70% of the vote, regardless of whether or not there's a signature-only candidate or a convention-only candidate, that would eliminate the signature candidates.
So in the scenario that I just proposed, where there's one convention candidate and one signature-only candidate, the signature candidate has no chance of getting on the primary ballot at all. There's no way for them to get on the primary ballot.
Yeah, the intent of the bill is to have everyone participate in the caucus convention system.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other clarifying questions? Representative Malloy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the good representative from Provo makes a really good point. So if the intent is whether it's 70% or 100%, because they're the only convention candidate, and they would move on and eliminate the signature gatherer, I would make sure that that is clear as we move this bill forward. I would encourage that.
Yeah.
So.
That is the intent. So I'll double check. I don't know how it affects the signature only path. And I'm wondering if the way the language is written is there really isn't a signature only path anymore, that there's only one path and it's through the convention. You still can collect signatures and get onto the ballot, but that's not you can't only collect signatures. You still have to participate in the caucus convention system.
One more, Mr. Chair.
No, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. So what you're saying, with that statement, the only time a signature only gatherer would be on the primaries if it was under 70%.
Correct. If no one receives 70% at convention.
Okay, just to clarify that. Thank you.
Seeing no other clarifying questions, we'll go to public comment. Is there anybody here to comment on this bill? Could you raise your hand just so I have a sense of how many? And if you're in favor, keep your hand up. If you're opposed, raise your hand. 2, all right. In favor, come on up, and then we'll go to the 2 opposed. If you could keep your comments germane to the bill and let's not rehash old items. Let me get the timer set. 1:30. Go ahead. Apologies. Hold on one second, Elaine. Hold on one second. I apologize.
No problem.
Go ahead and state your name as you were again, if you don't mind.
Delane England, representing Utah Eagle Forum and United Women's Forum. We really appreciate this bill because people make better decisions when they're more informed and more educated, and the more involved in the process they are, the more connected they are, the more they care about everything that happens in the elections themselves. And in a primary, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money kind of beating each other up. And so think of the money and time that can be spent on more positive, worthy results. And we can help people and we can do a lot of good in our community with that money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those opposed to the bill, if you want to come on up, and you have 1:30, if you could state your name for the record and who you represent. And the time is yours. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Taylor Morgan, speaking on behalf of Count My Vote. Not necessarily speaking against the bill, just clarifying that we don't support the language in the bill as it is. We're still working closely with the sponsor. Appreciate his approach to this and his fashion sense. But we are committed to finding a permanent solution, and we're still working on that. Just so to clarify, we don't support the bill as it is, but we are still working together. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no idea what his fashion sense has to do with it, but that's a good, nice compliment. Hold on if you don't mind, we have one question for Representative Hayes. If you'll remain seated, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What would an ideal solution look like to you?
Well, without getting into specifics, because we're still discussing that, I think we're committed to 2 points could improve the current process as we see it. The first would be if we're going to force all candidates to go to convention, we would like to see a higher threshold than what is proposed in the bill as it is. And then we would also like to lower the signature thresholds. We think the thresholds are currently too high. We never intended the consequences of high thresholds, paid gathering, so forth. So we would like to see those thresholds significantly reduced.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One more witness, if you'd like to come on up, state your name and who you represent. Go ahead.
Theo Gardner-Pushak. I'm on behalf of the Utah Democratic Party and Chair Diane Lewis. We understand that this bill is opt-in for political parties, but the bottom line is that we don't support efforts to make it harder to get on the primary ballot and get in front of more Utah voters. 70%, as Count My Vote pointed out, is not overwhelming support. I'd say that's a mischaracterization of that number. The sponsors' examples weren't particularly convincing, often 20-point gaps between convention and primary results. And personally, I'm not convinced that this change will increase participation. Explaining to party membership fairly arbitrary 70% number isn't a particularly compelling sales pitch. Convention delegates also, I'm sure you're all aware, aren't a great reflection of the primary electorate and the general election electorate ideologically. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to the committee for additional clarifying questions and/or committee action. Oh, sorry. We have one online that we need to go to first. Elizabeth Vanderdunten, if you want to unmute yourself, introduce yourself really quickly, and time is yours.
Okay, thank you. My name is Elizabeth Vanderwerken, and I live in Provo, and I am here representing Mormon Women for Ethical Government today. So one of the principles adhered to by our organization is that political structures and electoral systems should be designed to maximize participation of and provide equitable access to all citizens in a society. This bill promotes exclusivity in elections rather than promoting more access and participation of voters and candidates. The signature gathering path to the ballot represents an alternative method that is widely popular among voters and is widely used among candidates. If legislators are concerned that candidates are not engaging with the caucus and convention system, we feel there are other ways to positively encourage participation from those candidates that would not include punitive measures such as those enacted by this bill. We respectfully ask the committee to vote no on HB 393. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have Aaron Bolin. Aaron, if you'd like to state your name and who you represent, time is yours.
Hi, my name is Aaron Bolin. I live in Lehi, Utah, and I represent myself. And I am highly in favor of this bill. I think that it is a very reasonable ask that anyone who wants to be considered for a party nomination should at least get 30% or avoid somebody else getting 70% at convention. I think that's a very, very low number. I think it's not hard to get to that number. And, we had a situation in Utah County where I live where a candidate paid for signatures to run for Utah County attorney. And that candidate ended up losing by 30 to 40% in the primary, even though he only got 10% at convention. I think that that's a reflection of the fact that he tried to prove himself to the voters of Utah County, to the delegates of Utah County at convention, and was found not to be worthy of consideration. And then we had a situation where we had 3 candidates on the primary ballot. I think
Sir, that's your
caucus is a
time. If you
filtering
wouldn't
system.
mind.
Thank you.
If you
And
wouldn't mind.
it should remain a filtering system, and this helps it to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Having no other public comments, we'll go back to the committee for further clarifying questions and/or comments and/or committee action. I do have a couple of questions while the committee considers actions. Representative, I communicated that I have some nerves about this, but mostly it was, first of all, I really like the idea of saving money and time and effort, and especially, with all the other bills and concerns we have on voter fatigue and things of that nature. If we can prevent that, then I think that's appropriate. But I'm also really a competitive guy, and I don't like excuses for losing. And on its surface, it feels like we're fixing it so that we don't have to fight a tough fight. But would you mind just responding to that kind of thought process? I don't like at all excuses for losing, and there's always good ones, but I don't like them, and I don't want to fix a race. So respond to that if you wouldn't.
Yeah,
mind.
no, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Because I'm the same way. The intent of the bill is not to try to get people who would lose in a primary election the ability to win a convention. It's the exact opposite. It's to ensure that those that are going to win a primary anyway, based on the high level of support that they have in convention, to have to avoid exactly the things that you talked about, the fatigue and money that's spent and beating up each, members of your same party. And I think when you look at the overall examples that we have in the last few years of races, I can't find a single statewide race where someone gets over 70% in convention and then loses in a primary. It just doesn't happen. But the exact opposite happens all the time, where people get 70, 80% in convention and then get 60, 70% in a primary. And during that time, we've just, in my ways, in a lot of ways, wasted the time and efforts of those primary voters when we already went through a vetting process.
So one follow-up, and then we'll go to Representative Bollinger, who has a comment. So I guess if I were to land in a place where I'm convinced that this is more about a preventative measure more than trying to avoid a tough primary battle, it really is about that percentage. What's the right mark? And there's a suggestion that might be arbitrary, and I think you've done some fair amount of homework to establish that 70% on whether or not candidates would win or lose in the 70% battle. But it sounds like maybe there's some room for adjustment on that as the bill go forward in negotiation. Is that first validate that, is 70% arbitrary, and or is there room for negotiation on that?
It's a great question, Mr. Chair. It's not an arbitrary number. In fact, the state for a long time had a 70% threshold. Even before that, there was a time where there was an 80% threshold in convention. So we've had a 70% threshold, we've had an 80% threshold, we've had a 60%, which most counties in the state on the Republican side do that. And my understanding is Salt Lake County Democratic Party has a 55% threshold. So there are different numbers that have been used. I think what we're trying to figure out is where is that right number where we do exactly what you're saying, avoid not hard primaries, where we really want the primary voters to weigh in and give their opinion and figure out what the best candidate is, but avoid those primaries where there is a clear favorite and all we're doing is going through the motion and wasting time and resources. And I think 70% gets us there, but we're certainly continuing to negotiate with Count My Vote and other interested parties, the Democratic Party, Republican Party, et cetera, to figure out where is that right level, and whether it's 70% or 66.6 or 75% or whatever it is. There should be some threshold where if someone gets that level of support, that it helps them avoid a primary.
Fair enough. Thank you. Representative Bollinger.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment and then reserve my right to make a motion. That's okay, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So, first of all, I really appreciate the work done on this bill. As I've gotten feedback from people in my area, in my district, people are very supportive of this. And so, with that, I just want to make a motion to adopt the first substitute.
That motion being in order, I will place it. The motion is to adopt first substitute to HB 393 primary ballot requirements. Would you like to speak to that any further?
No.
Motion maker waves to the committee for discussion on that motion. Seeing none, we'll go to the sponsor.
I'll waive.
I'll restate the motion. The motion is to adopt first substitute to HB 393 primary ballot requirements. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I rule that motion passes unanimously. The substitute is adopted. Back to the underlying bill. Representative Perucci.
Thank you. I'd make a motion that we pass out House Bill 393 first substitute primary ballot requirements with a favorable recommendation.
That motion is in order. I'll place it. The motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation first substitute to HB 393 primary ballot requirements. Would you like to speak to that?
Just briefly, I appreciate the sponsors' work on this. I know this has been a labor of love over interim, and in just briefly in response to discussion around 70%, that's actually the initial amount Count My Vote requested in the initial negotiations that happened several years ago. So this number, I think, is a high bar, but one that can be achieved, and I think it does strengthen neighborhood system that gets more people engaged in the process. So with that, I'd ask for my colleagues' support on the bill.
Thank you, Representative Perucci. Representative, I believe Thurston was first, then we'll go to Representative Daley Provo after. on
Thank you,
comment.
Mr. Chair. So I'm looking around the committee. I don't know, but I'm one of the few people on this committee who's actually voted to repeal Senate Bill 54. We did that in my first session, or first year, or first 2 years. So I have no love for Senate Bill 54 and for the mess that it's created and for all of the chaos that we've had to deal with. Bill after bill, trying to figure out how to have a primary with more than 2 people, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot to fix if you want to keep the signature gathering path. The simple solution is to get rid of the signature gathering path. Then all of this other stuff goes away. How do we count votes in the primary? Goes away. How do we deal with this? Goes away. It all just goes away because we just go back to how things were, which was a simple life. That said, this particular approach to addressing some of the parts, I think has some pretty significant unintended consequence, not the least of which is that the fate of one person being on the ballot depends on 2 other people's performance in the convention. So if I'm a signature gathering person, I need the second place person in convention to get at least 30%. I don't need to get 30% myself. I just need someone else to get 30%. So it creates some really bizarre unintended consequences, which can lead to some behaviors and strategies that seem to just be out of the question. So I'm going to say, I'm tired of trying to fix Senate Bill 54. If we want to fix Senate Bill 54, get rid of it. So if the sponsor would come back with a bill that says there is no signature path, because that's kind of what he said, let's do that. And if the bill said there is no signature path and you have to have 70% in convention, I'm all in, like all my chips on that one. So, but to have this sort of this weird, well, there's a signature path, but there isn't a signature path, and your path to the ballot depends on how well someone else does, this is just too messy for me.
Thank you. Representative Daley Provo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would speak against the motion as well, simply because I think it's a mistake to conflate the support of delegates as being broadly reflective of a district, knowing that, you might have, I would say if you had 100 delegates, that would be remarkable. We've got districts that have maybe 50. My biggest concern with this is that you're saying to a candidate that they have to go put in the effort to gathering signatures, which for a state Senate district is 2,000 signatures, and for a House district is 1,000. If you're looking at federal, 7,000 for Congress, or for the U.S. House of Representatives, 28,000 for U.S. Senate, 28,000 for governor. That's significant resources, especially if you've got an army of volunteers that really believe in their candidate and have gone out and done that work. And then with the stroke of a few pens at convention, all of that work is completely nullified, all of the investment in it. And I think that that is deeply flawed and punitive. And I know that debates about the caucus convention system versus the signature gathering system continue to bring out some really high emotions, but this is the compromise that we came to, and it does work in a lot of instances. There are some very high-profile cases where the ultimate winners of elections, the governor, included Governor Herbert, lost at convention, but won overwhelmingly with the voters in the state of Utah. And I think that that's an example that is really reflective of how delegates don't necessarily reflect the overall voting populace, and to eliminate that option because of, the ability to recruit people who have the time and ability to attend caucus night, and not everybody does. There's, just the system itself disenfranchises a lot of people from being able to attend caucus night and have the time off of childcare and work. I think that this bill risks disenfranchising thousands of voters at the expense of maybe 100 voters. And I appreciate where you're coming from. I know that you really believe in the caucus system, but we have this compromise for a reason, and I think that this is a couple steps too far. Thanks.
We have several other presenters that are needing to get to meetings, so keep your questions as succinct as possible. Representative Malloy and then Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the sponsor bringing this bill forward. I'm going to disagree a little bit with my good colleague on the other side. And the caucus system, the ones I remember had standing room only and out the door standing room only, because everybody from their neighborhoods and their communities were going to the caucus to pick the delegates that were going to represent them at the convention to find a party candidate. And to me, that is a great system, and because it's truly a good example of the representative form of government. And I believe that SB 54, and I agree with my other colleague that it'd be great to just eliminate it. But at the same time, we have it, and I think we need to fight to get back to what I believe is the right way to do it through the caucus. And the caucus convention never was designed to eliminate a primary, but it was designed to allow the community and our friends and neighbors to decide who would go to a primary if certain thresholds weren't met. Many times in those old days, two candidates would go from the caucus, go to the convention, or go to the primary from the convention because the threshold wasn't met, and then we'd had a primary. Primaries aren't bad, but I think, if anything, the signature gathering is the area that has eliminated this representative form of picking candidates. And I think the sponsor made a good point. If we can get back to where we're spending our time getting people to go and attend their caucus, and the caucus is what, every 2 years? And so if we can't get babysitters, if we can't bring our kids, if we can't send spouses or whatever, there's lots of ways to attend your caucus. And so some of those excuses, I'm not buying into those because they're so infrequent. And they are special occasions. And a lot of times families do different things to take care of their kids while they go and do special things. So that's my position. I encourage passing out this bill.
Thank you, Representative Malloy. Back to the sponsor for some.
Thank you. Just a couple quick comments in response to the concerns around relying on other candidates and someone not getting 70% in convention. The answer is people need to compete in convention, right? And that solves the problem. And if your strategy is to avoid convention and just hope no one gets 70%, then you're stuck with the solution of what the delegates end up with. But I think the reality is this will get people more engaged in that convention process, talking to delegates, involved in the questions that they ask, and being responsive, and allow for better vetting of candidates. To the concerns about the delegates may not be broadly reflective of the primary, the reality is the numbers don't bear that out. Though there might be some differences in someone winning at 80% in convention and 20 or 60% in a primary, if you look at the actual numbers, they're very reflective of the actual results. The results end up looking exactly the same. And like I said, go and find me an example of a candidate in a statewide race that got 70% in convention and then lost a primary. It doesn't exist. And I'll just end with the comment that this is the essence of representative government. It's the idea that we entrust certain people to go and make the decisions and put in the work so that we don't have to. That's what we do up here at the legislature. That's the same thing that happens in the caucus convention system, so that the soccer mom that doesn't have time, or the businessman that is too busy, or, you know, whoever they are, that they can say, I trust this person in my community to go out and ask the hard questions and figure out who the right candidates are. And if they can't come to consensus on who the right person is, then it will come back to the primary voters. And that's what's important. So I would appreciate the support. I will commit that we'll work closely with Count My Vote. We'll try to get to a consensus. It's better for the entire state for us to be able to move past this and figure out what the best system is in the Utah way to nominate our candidates. And that's what is reflected in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the maker of the motion for some.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, just in response, I know everyone here has been in the political world. I've been working on campaigns since I was 16. We're kidding ourselves if we don't think candidates already don't jockey and support other candidates in the caucus system who they think they can beat. We've seen it in congressional races all the time. So this isn't creating a new problem. It's already there. It's a strategy people use. The political realities are we will probably never be able to unroll SB 54 completely. That's been talked about, again, since 2014 when it was implemented. I think this is a really good approach. I think it is much more of a balanced compromise, and I do think that this will hopefully and should encourage caucus turnout, and that candidates, part of our job is to help get people to caucus night and to help raise broad support of it. So with that, I'd ask for my colleagues' support of this.
Thank you. The motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation. First substitute to HB 393 primary ballot requirements. Roll call vote. Page.
Representative Bolander? Yes. Daily Provo? No. Greasus? Yes. Hayes? No. Malloy? Yes. Perucci?
Yes.
Stoddard? No. Thurston? No. Welton? Yes. Vice Chair Peterson?
Yes.
Chair Musselman?
Yes. I rule that motion passes with a 7-4 ratio, with Representative Daley Provo and Representative Hayes, Representative Stoddard, and Representative Thurston voting nay. Thank you. Senator Buxton, sorry to make you wait. SB 168, first substitute, State Agency Capital Development Fund. The time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Senator Buxton. I have with me Jim Russell, the director of the DFCM for the state of Utah, whose position I held at one time for a number of years, which stimulates this bill. This bill, as I was the director of the DFCM, I watched year after year as we put together a list and traveled the state and putting the building board list together and prioritizing those buildings, and then just to have the legislature not follow the priority. That was tough because, the education community would come in and they will dangle the carrot and they would say, here's, I got $30-40 million here in donations if we can get this project, and I need another $60 million from the state. Now, back in the early days, the big projects were like $45 million, and that was the library at the University of Utah and the library at Utah State. Those days are gone. I mean, the building at the University of Utah this year is $186 million, which is a lot of money, but they got a lot of money in donations behind that. This bill creates, like Senate Bill 102, an opportunity to set up a fund where you can put money in the fund, and that fund will automatically be spent on state agencies. But it still requires the approval of the IGG, requires the approval of the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget before it comes to this body for approval. But the funds are there so that they can plan and follow a plan. I have before me this book. This is a 5-year plan that's been being put together as long as I can remember. It was done long before I came to the legislature, and yet this 5-year plan is never followed for the state buildings and the state agencies that are in deplorable conditions in some cases. Have more people involved in the building than the fire codes will allow. An example of that's the Cannon building. We moved 300 people out of that building to be in compliance with the state fire code. We have other buildings that are probably not in compliance. We won't mention what they are because we don't want the fire marshal here telling us to shut them down or to move people out because we don't have the ability to do that. First substitute, Senate Bill 168 will do that. This bill creates a capital project fund to facilitate administration of funds and processes to the Division of Facilities and Construction Management for capital development project agencies. Okay? Why would we do that? Well, let me give you an idea why. This plan breaks into two phases. The first phase renovates 10 buildings. It's a $154 million plan. Phase 2 balances of state agencies. It reduces, has 10 projects, 5 new regional centers, and 5 renovations. It costs about $99.8 million. Some of the high priority construction projects in this building would be the Farmington, Richfield, and St. George regional centers, where you would gather in leases and consolidate buildings, saving about $49 million over a 50-year period. The St. George area, you would eliminate 11 leases, and an average savings of $1.2 million a year just from lease savings. Richfield is about $16 million, eliminates 7 leases, replaces 1 duplicate building, and averages savings of $319,000 per year. This is something that's important to the state. It's important that we spend our money effectively and efficiently. This is one way we can do that, but we've never been able to do it because we've never committed an ongoing funding source for state facilities. An example, on this year, again, you have the Loa Fish Hatchery. The Loa Fish Hatchery has been on the list for 7 years. Last year it ranked number 7 and not got funded. This year it ranked number 7. And at this point, from what I've seen with the executive meetings I've been in, it's not funded this year either. That's an example. That's something that brings revenue into our state. So what we're asking for is this capital facilities fund to be set up, put so much money in each year, and as we get enough money in to do these projects, we can plan, we can design, and we can build these projects. With that, I'll turn some time over to Jim to explain anything else or questions you might have.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for letting me be here today. Jim Russell, the Director of Division Facilities, Construction, and Management. Those that are in the interim committee might have remembered this renovation fund in the fall coming before you that encompasses the projects that Senator Buxton talked about. That portion of it is $250 million, but it saves the state $1 billion over 50 years. And so and it also gives our agencies the ability to redesign and reimagine their space. Right now, we've implemented teleworking to a point to where we're eliminating half the desks that we had before. But when they come into the office, they don't have the space that they need. They don't have the right size conference room. They don't have the technology that it takes to go and have a virtual and in-person combined meeting like you're having today right now. And so it's supporting the state agencies that don't have the money to do it, making their space more efficient. And when we get in the rural areas particularly, we can get out of lease space and save considerable dollars. This fund allows us to capture the lease revenue that is in place right now and bring back to the fund. And then also, as Senator Buxton mentioned, all of the state agency projects now could be funded and prioritized through this. They would be able to know when they're going to get funded. They don't have to come 7, 8 years in a row presenting the project. They can just present it once when they're up in queue. So with that, thank you. If there's any questions.
That concludes your presentation, Senator.
It does.
To the committee for clarifying questions, or I think that's Representative Provo. I don't have it labeled, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love this idea. Just because having spent a couple of years on executive appropriations, it's really, really hard to sift through all of the requests that come every year. So my question is would this not only allow for, but also require state agencies to decrease or eliminate coming to the legislature each year with those funding requests. And I see the benefit in giving that fund so that you as DFCM can manage that. But does it also have the effect of just making the job of EAC that much harder in having to sift through so many requests and try to figure out how to prioritize those?
All those priorities would be done by the DFCM and would be brought to IGG through the DFCM. So the prioritization of all of them would go to the DFCM, and they would prioritize and bring them forward, those that meet the criteria or are in the priority.
So to put a fine point on it and to clarify, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
We would put this 246 million into a fund, you would manage it. That would eliminate then any agency who didn't necessarily get what they wanted when they wanted from also coming back to the legislature and putting more strain and requests to the legislature each year.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And it does eliminate EAC burden because it's done in IGG and it's done in a more thoughtful way. But it also, and you know, the agencies don't have to come each year and present, which takes up time in committee and their resources as well, but they can also plan. And then the other thing is if you give me like $50 million for a building right now, most of that's spent 2.5 years from now in the last 6 months of the project. This allows us to schedule the projects out, and we can get them programmed 1 year, designed 1 year, constructed the next, so we can actually do it faster, and then by making the dollars go farther and be, you know, more consistent and scheduled in our means.
One more, if I may.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You're on a line of questions that's helping
I
me as
know,
well.
I'm
So-
sorry.
No, you're actually right on the same line I would have been on.
Okay,
so
thank
keep
you.
going.
246 million one time. At what point does that money run out and we need to come back and look at more funding?
If you do the statewide master plan and all of the state agency projects that are out there right now, that's about $400 million. So there would be some need for ongoing or one-time funding, but that'd be over a 10-year period. So it will go quite a ways. I mean, if we wouldn't have to get any additional funding for probably 5 years.
Great, thank you.
With the one-time funding that's there. And then keep in mind, the revenue that will come back from selling buildings, selling 18 buildings, 73 leases, that revenue will come back to this fund, which will help fund those buildings in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Clarifying questions from, I think, Representative Perucci or Malloy. I'm not sure. Representative Malloy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it would prioritize all the projects. Can you give me an idea of what would be considered as far as how they would be prioritized? And then the other question would be, like we sometimes still discuss in the transportation fund where they have their priority of projects and stuff, they still get somewhat political based on where legislators' areas have need in the state. So I guess that would be a question, if we have this long list of priorities, how are they prioritized and what guardrails are you putting in place to keep it from being influenced by political?
I think the priority, and you mentioned it, and I was called on the carpet while being the director as to why we didn't follow. And I went before the committee and I said, the reason we don't follow is because the president's go in the back door and make their deal. Which was, they were all shocked that I would say that, but that was the truth. Yeah. This is a priority that has to be worked out with the governor's office and with the DFCM. Then that priority moves forward. The DFCM will go forward and research the buildings, research the projects, look at what's really needed first, and that's what would set the parameters for the priority. We have buildings that, that they got here on the sheet. Farmington, Richfield, and St. George as some of their high priorities, because that brings in 5 leases. In Farmington, it brings in 11 leases into one facility. So you got all those payments that are being made out in leases that also come back into that fund, which that fund could possibly fund other projects over a period of time. Build it up, and you can see that happening, and then the planning, you know how far you can go and what you can do and you can't do. But it also requires some big buildings too, and those would have to be prioritized and go through IGG for prioritization, both from IGG and from the governor's planning and budget, and the final decision with the legislature.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If I might add, just on that question there, we have about 12 categories that we rank the projects on based on life safety, critical need, structural issues, that just can have the age of the building, the usefulness of the building, space utilization, can we consolidate buildings? You know, I can go on and on. We have all these these non-subjective, you know, categories that we score the buildings on, and that's what we put forward to the governor's office and the legislature. And if there's any moving around for a political reason or for something that's more subjective, which can be legitimate, then that would be at their input, not at ours. We do it based on just technical merits of the project, you know, the cost efficiency and all the other things that I mentioned. So.
Okay, thank you. I got one, maybe a couple clarifying questions. If I understand it right, so IGG has a certain amount of, both you understand IGG better than I do, but I have a reasonable understanding of it. IGG has a certain budget, let's say next year. With the amount that's set aside here, would that in essence reduce in an equivalent amount what IGG would have set aside for their budget? And even though the funding would come out of here for some of those projects, there would still be a presentation in IGG for them, minus those ones that don't come onto the priority list. Help me just walk through that
Just for permission. When they come to IGG, after this is funded and they come to IGG, it's just for permission to do it.
Because you already have the money set aside.
You've already got the money set aside. You notice this year in IGG, I don't know, were you on the committee this year?
I wasn't, no.
Okay, the school buildings that they prioritized one higher ed and one ATC. Okay, everything else in that committee was either there for permission or trying to go around the system. All those that were trying to go around the system were cut because the system has been set up. This would be kind of the same thing. Would be no agency approvals or presentations at the committee because they would already be funded and would be prioritized, and we're just coming for approval. Okay, it's not a request for funds, it's just a request for approval.
So, in essence, in my mind, this would move all state buildings up in priority automatically. There wouldn't be this jostling and competing with other.
You'd have those in this category, you'd have those in this category. And they're not competing against each other because they each have their funding separate.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Go to public comment. Is anybody here to speak to this bill, either for or against? Seeing none, any online? Back to the committee for additional clarifying questions and/or committee action. I'd entertain a motion. Representative Malloy.
I have a question and would reserve the right to make a motion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we talk about the fiscal note just a little bit? It's $250 million, and do we feel like this can get through?
Do we feel like it can get through in a year where there's the monies that I believe that we'll get some of it. I don't believe that we'll get all of it.
And you'd be okay with that?
We can't spend all that money in 1 year anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so here's the motion. I would make a motion that we pass favorably. There's no sub, right?
We're
It is
we've
subbed
done that.
already.
That's what we're addressing.
So we need to adopt it?
No, it's already
Oh,
done.
okay, great. All right, so I would make a motion to pass favorably, first substitute SB 168 State Agency Capital Development Fund.
That motion is in order. I'll place it. The motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation, SB 168 for substitute State Agency Capital Development Fund. Would you like to speak to that?
I'll waive.
Representative Malloy, make the motion waives to the committee for any discussion and or comment on that motion. Seeing none, to the bill sponsor for some, Senator Buxton.
I'll wait.
The sponsor waives. Back to the maker of the motion for some. Representative Malloy.
I'll waive.
The motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation, SB 168, first substitute, State Agency Capital Development Fund. Roll call vote. Paige?
Representative Bolander? Daley Provo? Gracious? Hayes? Malloy?
Yes.
Carucci? Stoddard? Thurston? Welton? Vice Chair Peterson? Chair Musselman?
Yes, I rule that motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Senator Buxton.
Thank you.
Representative Christopherson. Is Representative Christopherson not here? Representative Wilcox is not here. Representative Strong, are you here? Nobody's here. I'd like to. For clarifying, I know that Representative Strong was presenting in another committee and was trying to balance this, and Representative Wilcox has had some car troubles and is trying to get here. Can we get Representative Wilcox on Zoom, possibly?
I got a text, I don't know if you got it, saying that Representative Christopherson will be right here. On his way.
Two of us, huh? You want to go first? I don't care. Go.
Okay, just showed up. All right, well, Representative Strong, you're in the seat, so we're gonna roll. So Representative Strong, HCR 5, concurrent resolution opposing federal legislative efforts to strip states of authority to regulate congressional elections. Could that have been longer, or no?
I didn't write it.
Okay, all right, time's yours, go ahead.
Thanks. And thanks for accommodating me. I've got the Senate Business Committee has 21 bills on their docket, and I'm trying to squeeze them in. I've got one over there too. So this is a simple resolution. With all of the drama around our elections a couple of years back, there were a lot of discussions in our federal delegation, not ours necessarily our representatives, but the representatives in general, about trying to get control of our elections. And the point of this bill is to basically say, this resolution rather, and I know it's not binding, but it was all that I felt like we could do, but it basically says that we oppose any federal movement into our elections. I really actually appreciate the words of the drafting attorney, and I won't read the whole thing to you, but there's a couple in here that I really liked. It says, whereas this principle is embodied in the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, to wit, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Then line 40, Whereas the United States Constitution Elections Clause, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 states in part, the times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. And then going on, James Madison, explaining the purpose of election clause in ratifying Virginia Convention of 1788, stated that it was necessary to leave the regulation of congressional elections to the state governments, as they are best acquainted with the situation of the people. I agree with all those statements and the other ones on here as well. Now therefore, let it be resolved that the legislature of the state of Utah and the governor concurring therein calls upon members of the United States Congress to oppose all legislative efforts to transfer state and local control of congressional elections to the federal government. That is the resolution. Basically, we want to be sure. I would much rather have 50 independent electoral processes rather than have the federal government try and step in thinking that they can somehow run it better. Much more comfortable with each of our 50 individual states, especially that of Utah. And with that, I am done with my presentation.
That concludes your presentation. We'll go to clarifying questions. Representative Stoddard.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I understand through your presentation, this hasn't been a problem yet.
No, it was things that were discussed. There was, I remember just listening to the news and they're saying, oh, we've got to, with some of the struggles that took place in the election, talking more and more about getting involved in that arena. But it was not something that is proposed on a federal level officially.
Do you believe that the federal government at all has a role in how our elections are run?
Well, absolutely they do. But I believe that the actual conducting the election themselves is much safer and better having 50 individual states, which might be flawed in some way, in part, is better than having one governing system that, if has any flaws, it applies across 50 states.
So sorry, may I ask one more follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Representative.
So how does this resolution interact with existing federal laws like the Fair Voting Act, ADA?
It wouldn't affect in any way. It's just a statement saying we encourage you to stay out of the state election process. It does have no effect. It's a resolution.
So it's a resolution that's trying to make a statement on a problem we don't have.
Well, I agree with the first part of your statement. The second part, I'd say, is a problem that does not exist in code, but has been discussed. And you can call it a preemptive statement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other clarifying questions? I have one clarifying question. As it pertains to federal involvement, the Constitution sets up parameters, as clearly stated in your bill, to prevent the federal government from being overly involved in our local elections. So doesn't the Constitution already solve this? Do we need a resolution to state what is clearly protected by the Constitution? Or are you afraid that there'd be an amendment that would, to the actual Constitution, that could open up the door?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily concerned about an amendment. And unfortunately, I should have had it marked and out. But the section that regards the election process stated in the Constitution actually does say that the federal government does have the right to change this. So it does say that it is the right of the states. However, and again, I can't remember, this is pretty crucial to my statements, but I don't have I don't have it in front of me, the actual words that it says there, but the Constitution itself does say that they can take this right.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions from the committee? Was there anybody from the general public who would like to speak to this? Seeing none here present, is there anybody online? Hillary Wheat. Hillary Wheat, if you would like to unmute yourself, state your name for the record and who you represent. The time is yours. You have a minute and a half.
Thank you. My name is Mallory Wheat, and I live in Draper, and I'm here representing Mormon Women for Ethical Government today. We believe that this resolution is unnecessary since the federal constitution addresses these provisions and is accompanied by longstanding precedent established by the Supreme Court. The federal constitution makes specific provisions regarding elections for the offices of congressional representatives and senators, with certain powers being granted to states and certain powers being reserved for the federal government. We feel that these provisions exist to provide balance and checks on power between the federal and state governments, and that the existing constitutional provisions appropriately address the role of each level of government in these elections. So we do not feel that this resolution is necessary and respectfully ask that the committee vote no on HCR 5. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to, seeing no further public comment, we'll go back to the committee for further comment and/or committee action. Representative Peterson?
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. While it hasn't been an issue, we've seen that there's been many times over the course of the last recent decades, especially, where there's been things done that could be argued that they are or not in compliance with the Constitution. So I think that for Utah to send this message to reiterate our position that elections ought to be retained in the state, I think is a wonderful idea, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. Thank you.
Representative Daley Provo? Oops, sorry. So I let my alarm in the morning. I just let it keep going.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did Representative Peterson just make a motion?
He did not make a motion. We can have the opportunity for further statements and
Sure.
clarification on this.
Okay, great. I just have a brief statement. I'm reading from the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. The times, place, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So that is in full agreement with the proposed resolution. Second part of the Constitution states, but the Congress may at time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. So I would argue that this resolution is in agreement with the first part of that clause, but in direct opposition to the second. And if we believe in the Constitution of the United States, I think that it would be unwise of us to pass a resolution that is in direct opposition to what our Constitution states.
Thank you. Any other comment and/or committee action to the committee? Representative Daley Provo?
Make a motion that we move to the next item on the agenda.
The motion is ordered. The motion is to move to the next item on the agenda. Would you like to speak to that?
I believe I just did.
To the committee for any comment on that motion. Representative Perucci?
I'd make a substitute motion.
That motion is ordered. The motion, well, state your motion.
It sounds like the sponsor's still willing if we do need to tweak any language to make sure we are in compliance and cohesive and consistent with the Constitution. But I think the message that you're trying to send, I understand, and I know it is something that has been discussed in policy discussions that we've talked about elections. So the substitute motion would be that we pass out House Concurrent Resolution 5. I don't think I need to read the whole name, with a favorable recommendation.
Sorry?
Do I need to read the whole thing?
Oh, restate your, I apologize.
Substitute motion is pass out House Concurrent Resolution number 5 out of this committee with a favorable recommendation.
Okay, the motion is ordered. The motion is to, substitute motion would be to pass out with a favorable recommendation, HCR 5, concurrent resolution opposing federal legislative efforts to strip states of authority to regulate congressional elections. You already spoke to that?
I did speak to that, yep.
Okay, to the committee for comment on that? Oh, wait, we gotta go. Hold on, let me get this one right. Go to Representative Daley Provo for comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we consider and debate a lot of really important pieces of legislation, and we shouldn't get tied down in talking about resolutions that are in direct contradiction to the U.S. Constitution. So I would oppose the substitute motion.
To the committee to comment on the substitute motion. Representative Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the substitute motion. There's been a good discussion about whether this is needed because of what the Constitution tells us. The only problem with that is we currently have a federal government that really doesn't pay a lot of attention to the Constitution. And so I think what this resolution says is the state of Utah is going to pay attention to the Constitution, and we are not going to be supportive of the federal government coming in and doing some of the things that they've been threatening to do or hinting at doing that would be unconstitutional. So I support the substitute motion.
Any other comments on the motion, the substitute motion? Hearing none, to the bill sponsor. Oh, you switched mics, or I switched mics. I didn't mean to. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
there we go. Let's be clear what this says, okay? I'm going to read this to you again. The times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Okay? We can all agree on that. Now listen to the second part. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Now, we know in our history, we've had a change in this choosing of our senators. Senators used to be chosen by state legislatures. Now it's through the vote. So it does very clearly state here that Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. So to say that this is somehow not in line with the Constitution, and me not being a constitutional scholar, I don't think that's accurate. I think where this is just a regulation, a resolution, it sends an important statement to the federal government that all 50 states should be held independent and there should be no inclusion from them in that arena, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Sub-motion maker for sub.
I'll waive.
The motion is to pass out with favorable recommendation HCR 5, concurrent resolution opposing federal legislative efforts to strip states of authority to regulate congressional elections. We'll do a roll call vote. Paige?
Representative Bolander? Yes. Daley Provo? No. Gracious? Yes. Hayes? No. Malloy? Yes. Carucci? Yes. Stoddard? No. Thurston? Yes. Vice Chair Peterson? Yes. Chair Musselman?
No. I rule that motion passes 6-4. Representative Musselman, Representative Daley Provo, Representative Hayes, and Representative Stoddard voting no. Congratulations, Representative.
Thank you.
Representative Thurston.
Just as a point of information, since this is a non-binding resolution, it should be placed on the consent calendar per our rules with no vote from the committee.
Yeah, you have a no vote, so it can't, as I understand it.
Per our rules, if it's a non-binding resolution, even if it's not unanimous, it should go to consent. So just make a note of that.
It can go to consent. It shouldn't, it automatically goes to consent?
Automatic, if it's a non-binding resolution, it automatically goes to consent regardless of the vote.
Okay.
So just,
So
I don't want
if it-
everyone to be surprised as to why it's on
Oh,
consent.
I see. You're just making the statement. This
Yeah.
isn't action. Okay, thank
Not a
you.
motion.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Representative Wilcox, time is yours.
Thank you. After that presentation, I'm not going to make any claims regarding the potential length of this conversation. That said, this is state property transfer. Essentially what the chair and I have been trying to do for the last 2 years is to stop us from wasting taxpayer money by requiring unnecessary appraisals when we're transferring land to ourselves. This is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, whether it's transferring from UDOT to DNR for a road or vice versa, or from DNR to county jail, et cetera. So that's really what this is about. You see the caveats there at the bottom of the bill, lines 49 through 56, where it says, if it's required by law, otherwise we're happy to do that. It has to be done for a public purpose, all of those things. But we're essentially trying to not waste taxpayer money. This was brought to me originally by a former member of our legislature who is also an appraiser, who was being paid by the state a lot of money to do this, and made the phone call and said, hey, this shouldn't really be happening. I appreciate the work, but we're wasting a lot of money here. So I appreciate that, and shout out to Representative Anderson, and there it is.
Perfect, thank you. That concludes your presentation, Representative Wilcox.
It does.
To the committee for clarifying questions. Seeing none, is there anybody from the public who would like to speak to this? Seeing none? None online. Back to the committee for committee action and/or further comment. Well, the lights just went up, but I think Representative Perucci was first.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to pass House Bill 457, state property transfer amendments out of this committee with a favorable recommendation.
That motion is in order. The place of the motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation. House Bill 457, state property transfer amendments. Would you like to speak to that?
I'll waive.
Motion maker waves to the committee for any comment on that. I'll just make a comment. I love this bill. Very, very well done. Thank you. Seeing no other comments to the sponsor for some.
I'll waive, thanks.
And I'll place that motion. Representative Perucci, did you want some? Okay.
Waive.
Motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation, HB 457, state property transfer amendments. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I rule that motion, no. Go ahead, Representative Daley Provo.
Representative, would you like this on consent?
Oh, wait, let me rule that first, just real quick. I rule that motion passes unanimously. Now, Representative Daley Provo, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the incredible positive fiscal note, I was wondering if you'd like to place this on consent.
I think that'd be a good idea.
I'd like to make a motion to place House Bill 412 on consent.
The motion is to place House Bill 457, state property transfer amendments on the consent calendar. Would you like to speak to that? She said 412, but I clarified.
Well, and just to clarify, we don't have a lot of bills on the board, so it might slow it down to put it on consent, but I just wanted to check. It's up to you.
How many are on consent?
There's a bunch coming, so.
Just put it on consent, I guess. We get it done this week either way.
Okay. Would you like to speak to that, Representative De La Provo? Any sum on that? You okay with that, Representative Wilcox?
Yeah, it's fine.
All those in favor of placing HB 457 state property transfer amendments on consent calendar, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I rule that motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Representative Wilcox.
Thank you.
Is Representative, I think we have one left. Christopherson? Oh, okay, he's right there. Sorry. Come on up, Representative Christopherson. HB 412, state employment revisions. And I believe there's both a first and a second sub online. Neither have been adopted. Which will you be speaking to, Representative?
To the second sub.
Second substitute.
Hey, thank you, committee and chairs. Appreciate this. This will be HB 412, second sub, and with me, I have John Barron, the Director of HR for the state. Also in the audience is Jenny Reese, who's the Director of the Department of Government Operations. And I just wanted to, what this bill does is extends a little bit of what we did last year with modernizing the employee structure for the state. And what we did last year is allowed those who were supervisors and managers to move to an at-will status away from career service. Right now, all of the remaining employees are career service employees, and this bill would just say you have an option to move away from career service to an at-will status if you choose. You don't have to if you don't want to. It also makes pay for performance modifications. It allows an independent entity in the state, which State Institutional Trust Lands had asked for. They would like to implement that. It moves all new employees to Schedule AY, which is career service exempt, and then allows the division to incentivize those who make that choice. And I'm going to add a little bit more color to this. I'm going to have John Barron, the HR director for the state, discuss that a little bit. And I think you've got some slides, is that right? Can we bring those up?
I've plugged in.
Oh.
Oh.
There you go.
Thank you. My name is John Barrett. I'm the head of HR, or the division director for the Division of Human Resource Management. And I'm here to talk about the additional language moving House Bill 412, similar to last year's House Bill 104. As the setup, there's Schedule A, Schedule B, career service, and at-will, or career service exempt, however you like to talk about it. And currently, nationally, there's no consensus among academics or practitioners on what type of employment is optimal in government. However, proponents of at-will, much like myself, emphasize flexibility and responsiveness, while opponents will argue that government operates in a political environment. A merit-based career system with some due process protections protects employees in the work they do from partisan political influences. I want to make sure that as we talk about this, that you don't get enamored by the idea that there isn't any protection for at-will employees. What you're seeing is a the state of Utah's career service or merit principles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think there's 7. And the one that's going to be most hotly discussed will be the grievance procedure, a fair, expeditious, and inexpensive grievance process that typically takes place outside of the agency. I, as the head of HR for the executive branch, can tell you that DHRM has processes and best practices that exist regardless of schedule code that protect our employees, that allow them the opportunity to be free from retaliation, political coercion, discrimination, abusive conduct. All employees, regardless of schedule code, are welcome to issue a complaint to their employer, to their supervisor, to HR. These modern HR principles create an opportunity for employees to come forward anonymously, directly, or they can work with HR. Gratefully, through your legislative support last year and with supportive organizations last year like UPEA, we've had additional opportunities to strengthen these managers with the passing of House Bill 104 from the 2022 session that requires annual training for managers. First time we have legally required training for these managers. Although the principles, the merit principles that we're discussing, were created 135 years ago, I believe they're valid today. I want you to hear that I believe in the merit principles that we're discussing. However, I believe the merit principles too often are the ends to themselves rather than the instruments to pursue the system that we're looking to progress, right? The problem, in short, is we have broad support in Utah for the pursuit of merit principles. However, we no longer have consensus on what merit principles actually mean. We're committed to merit, but the laws, rules, and regulations that realize these principles today, they really hinder the pursuit of the government's mission. So I want to just quickly help you understand that while the at-will relationship has been around in the state for over 100 years, we've continued to adapt our management process to allow for poor-performing employees to respond to progressive discipline, documented feedback, performance reviews, performance improvement plans. When an employee's performance is substandard, usually they and their manager, they have a high probability that they know it, either through communications, one-on-ones, or documentation. Prior to the decision to terminate, typically HR is involved, and we usually engage in a 60 or 90-day performance plan. However, that agency autonomy is given, so you'll hear different variations if you meet with different agency leaders. In career service status, there are some additional pressure points other than just managing performance. Supervisors tell us that they acknowledge that there's an arduous process that typically disincentivizes them to progress employee performance due to the extra long nature of the process. And then the actively disengaged employee acknowledges that they're aware of the arduous process and they can become emboldened by it. I want to show you quickly. This is from the federal government. Over 200,000 federal employees that are mired in the career service employment. Their peers and colleagues acknowledge that when there's a poor performer in their work unit, the poor performer remains in the work unit and continues to underperform. So unsurprisingly, some employees do not work as hard when they know it's difficult to fire them. But research shows that poor performers demotivate and reduce the performance of productive employees as well. So in sum, a poor performer drags everyone down. I just want you to see in the state of Utah in 2007 to 2009, there was an average of 36 cases a year that progressed to the Career Service Review Office. In the last decade, that's diminished down 92% to 3 per year. Correspondingly, the better story that the HR nerd in me likes to tell is 2007, the Division of Human Resource Management was stood up and centralized, meaning we took them out of the embedding and being paid by the agencies. And now my team of 130 serve independent and objectively. So in the last 15 years, the Career Service Review Office has diminished the amount of grievances that head to it, meaning HR, the AG's office, Division of Risk, and managers themselves are managing these employees far stronger than they ever have before. Just as a quick double click into that, we have an average of 15,000 career service employees. We have a yearly average of 159 employees exiting for cause. We've had, since 2018, a total of 9 career service office hearings, and 0 of the exits for cause have been overturned. There's a 1 with an asterisk. There was a career service review office case that was overturned for demotion. So in the last 5 years, an external group is telling us that we as managers and leaders are getting it right, that we are managing performance and we are managing employees the proper way. I also just quickly want to comment that the Schedule B compensation strategy, because of your generous investments, the average Schedule B employee over the last 18 months has gotten a 17.6% increase. That's banking on the proposals in the governor's budget and the current compensation bills that are progressing. You may hear that the only way to get an increase in state government is to opt into this. That's factually inaccurate. We took the 5% out of this. So if these employees opt in, they'll average a 22% increase in the last 18 months. Staggering generational investments in our employees. That's what's keeping them here, not the career service process. Also, just to be clear, we did this last year, and I know I'm here to speak in support of the bill, but I also want you to know that the employees are fully supporting it. So last year, we invited roughly 3,000 supervisors to opt in, and as of this morning, we have a 75% response rate, right? And 93% of them are opting in. So they still have time, about 800 of them remaining to opt in or opt out. But that number is 161 who have told us have opted out, a 93% success rate. So even though I'm in favor of this, they're telling us they're in favor as well. They're saying that they trust us, and they see the relationship between the manager and the employee, leadership and frontline employee, and there's just trust there. Lastly, to that point.
Are you getting close to, there's a couple questions on some of the slides, and I don't want to miss them. Are
Sure.
you getting close to being complete?
I think this is my last slide, I believe.
Okay.
Two slides, thank you. Last summer, we engaged in the conversation about what to do next with Representative Christofferson. And we started with the point that we should carve post out, post positions in corrections and public safety. The way that they engage with the public in their daily lives and in their job can be a little different than the remaining 13,000 employees. However, since the introduction of House Bill 104, I've actually been told pretty candidly and pretty regularly that these post employees want to opt in. So I believe today there's a substitute coming out where we had originally carved out the post employees. They have loudly and clearly told us that they want the option to opt in. What that signifies is that they trust us, that they've had 8 months to watch what's happened, that of the 2,000 employees that have opted in, there's only been 1 exit for cause, that they know that we're not doing this just to exit employees. We're diminishing the fear or the perception of fear that all we want to do is exit employees. Lastly, I just want to say that public servants shouldn't be viewed as symbols of big government or problems that need to be eliminated whenever possible. That's not what we're here to talk about. The Utah state government needs to follow a central lesson that leading private corporations teach, that the best managed companies see their employees as their biggest assets. Democracies around the world created these professional career services in the late 1800s to prevent corruption, nepotism, poor performance that existed under earlier spoils systems. These standard systems made sense when governments had limited numbers of agencies and the workforce was filled with clerks, right? The system proved remarkable for a long time. It got us through 2 world wars, a cold one, a Great Depression, and now stimulating technology innovation. The government has changed their responsibilities since the late 1800s, and we need a more highly skilled workforce. We need it to be agile, and the career service system is no longer that type of system. It's often mired in arcane processes before the internet, interstates, or an global economy. I fully support this bill. I fully support breaking us free from the career service process and would happily take any questions.
There's a couple questions for the committee, and I'm sure there will be more that will come, but can you go back to slide number 12? So among the supervisors that have responded, 97% have chosen to go at will. What does among the supervisors that have responded mean? Clarify that.
Very good. House Bill 104 gave 3,000 supervisors a full year, so from July 1 of last year to June 30th of this year, to opt in. We send right now about monthly communications reminding the remaining 800 employees or supervisors who still have yet to opt in that they at least need to notify a yes or no. This data set is pulled just from corrections and public safety. So we typically have had a 92.6% opt-in rate among that population. Among the post-certified employees, we have a 97% opt-in rate. So we still have supervisors that have yet to respond.
Yes, but I'm just trying to make, sometimes percentages can throw us off. And
sure.
Either way, it's gonna be pretty high, but there's an assumption is that if they haven't responded, that they're not going to opt in or they don't want to opt in. Is that not an assumption?
I'm not making that assumption for them, but amongst this population, I'm not sure the total number among the 667, but among the 3,000 employees, we still are waiting for 800 people to respond, meaning we have a 74% response rate as of right now.
Right.
But Mr. Chair, I don't know the numbers.
I think that some people haven't made that decision yet because they're waiting to see what the policies how they develop and see what experience some of the other employees have, and they'll probably wait till close to the deadline.
So it's not a fair assumption to assume that they don't want to opt in?
No.
Okay. All right. Back to slide 11, then we'll go to slide 5 in one moment. Representative Perucci. So slide 11, the 92.6% opt-in, only 165 have opted out. Okay. All right, that clarifies what I needed. Thank you. Representative Perucci, she had a question on slide 5, so if you want to go back to that, she can ask that question.
That was for a short thing.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to confirm, when you were presenting this, is this federal data based off federal employees?
It is.
So this isn't state employees who are voicing these concerns? Right.
Correct. This is not a survey of state employees.
Okay. Okay, and then on number 6, do you mind going one more? Oh, sorry, go one more. Sure. I had all these while we were going through.
I'm sorry.
So then this is the number of career service employees. It looks like it's working in that where you said that you haven't had any overturned, right? That people haven't appealed the process. I'd be curious to see what the federal numbers are.
Sure.
Just whenever we're using federal data, I worked in a congressional office and I worked with people in agencies who had been there longer than I'd been alive, and I get that people get entrenched. I just don't know. I'm curious if the culture in state agencies is the same, because I would like to think it's different. So I just wanted to make sure when we're comparing data, that was federal data we're looking at on that survey. This is state data, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Bailey Provo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To either of you, sorry. My understanding is a central key to this moving to the at-will piece is ensuring job safety, not job safety, job security, thank you. With robust management training. And I'm looking at the audit by our legislative auditors, and it looks like as of 2021, with 11 years of trying to improve this, we're still not doing very well. There are only three divisions in the state that are even over 50%, and 2 of them is just barely over 50%. We've still got 0. In a couple, 11%. There's one that's 84%, that's Department of Human Resource Management, so well done. I have concerns about this because the premise in moving toward at-will is making sure that you're giving your employees the opportunity and the skill set to be successful, and yet we're still not there. I'm also concerned that the first part of this was passed less than a year ago, and while you clearly believe in the positive outcomes of this, I think that it is way too soon to be running a victory lap on this program. The audit says the decentralization of personnel training may have contributed to the low percentage of managers receiving any type of management training from DHRM. And so I have concerns, Representative. I think that this is rather premature, and wondered if you could speak to the training piece, especially given that it has been central to your argument for the policy.
Representative and/or your fellow presenter, if you want to respond to that. Her question was specific to the training, I believe.
Yeah, the training is a new feature for sure, but those who have received the training are, it's a positive thing for them. It's something that both the division and Utah Public Employees Association push for, and we've had people that have said we want to be included in the options for an at-will or career service exempt status, and so this allows that option. Did you have something else you wanted?
Yeah, the audit was in 2021, and last year House Bill 104 for the first time ever required training for our managers, which comes with 5 principles of manager training at a minimum that is actually centralized through DHRM. So we have the opportunity to engage with those 3,800 managers. It also requires quarterly check-ins, and that those managers actually be held accountable for the way they manage. So we did, that audit was quite grilling and substantial for me as someone who takes the burden of this employee engagement world that we're living in now. Luckily, that bill, and luckily the last 8 months of work, and you're right, it is early. I'll openly tell you that I believe that standing up this manager training is a 3-year process with a good, better, best, or iterate. We'll review this on an annual basis, but we have a lot to roll out in the next 90 days to meet that requirement. We're on track, but every manager will be annually trained for the first time ever, and I'd be happy to report back according to the timing that's appropriate for you. But legally, I have a requirement to get 100%, and I look forward to getting it.
Okay, with due respect, Mr. Chair, the first time that the auditors looked at this training program was 2010, and I mean, I know that the audit precedes this bill, but it's hard to have a lot of confidence in the motivation to get this training done, given that there was an 11-year span. So, and I have a lot of heartburn because so much of the metric for this proposed program is this training, and I would say the track record is concerning at best. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Is there anybody here that would like to speak to this? You'll need to do it quickly, like really quickly. So keep your comments extremely succinct. I'm going to give you 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Todd Losser, Executive Director of the Utah Public Employees Association. I want to talk about due process. It's efficient, fair, and works for both management and employees. Due process holds management to a higher standard and allows employees to tell their story. Last year, HB 104 significantly reduced due process timelines that allow employees to grieve a disciplinary action. UPA worked alongside stakeholders to streamline the process and advocated on behalf of these changes. We believe the current due process system will allow government to remain effective and productive. These changes took place on July 1st, 2022. Over the past year, UPA has traveled across the state, talking to state employees about their jobs and what they do. They love what they do. They love it. Not one employee has come up to us, to UPEA or my staff, and said, "This is awesome, what a great plan." Nobody. All they want to do there is their job. That's it. And they can be held accountable. There is nothing in the career service that says that they cannot be accountable if they're a poor performer. Please don't pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Next, please, quickly. Time is yours. State your name.
Hello, my name is Audrey Wood. I am testifying today on behalf of UPEA, and as myself, I will provide very brief comments and hopefully can talk really fast. That audit from 2010 is hugely concerning. We went from 8% of managers being trained to 30%. If I was a state employee, does this elicit confidence in me to trust HR and management to fairly represent me? One of the things that we are really concerned about is the recruitment and retention of employees, especially now more than ever. The career service was created to protect employees from this exact situation. I would urge you to not pass this legislation. We don't have, if it takes 3 years to train a manager, we haven't even spent a year doing it yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Are you testifying for or against? Is there anybody testifying for? We're going to make this the last comment. Go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Corey Holdaway. I'm testifying on behalf of the public employees of the state. I want to give a little history, and I know I've only got a minute. 104 came about as a result of 56 different meetings that was held leading up to the passage of it. We were very involved with the passage of House Bill 104 from last year. This year, the dust hasn't even settled from 104. And now we're being asked to swallow all state employees going to at will. This is a bad policy. Let's let the dust settle from last year. I would encourage a no vote on this legislation, and let's move forward.
Thank you.
Can I just make one other comment?
Yeah, you had about 15 seconds.
Thank you. At this stage in the session, to only be given 3 minutes to counter the arguments of this bill, it doesn't sit well.
To be clear, we're backed up against floor time.
I understand.
No, well, let me explain. In 10 minutes, we cannot take action on this bill. And I think to be fair to everyone, we need the opportunity to be able to give appropriate action for the bill. Jared Larson, you're online if you'd like to unmute yourself. You have 1 minute. Jared, your time's ticking. Jared, we're going to move on to the next one if you want to try and figure out how to unmute. Lauren Schulnick, if you would like to unmute yourself, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lauren Skolnick. I am representing the trial lawyers. I'm an employment lawyer. I represent state employees in the civil service process. I'm also an employment law professor at the University of Utah College of Law. In this bill, there is no requirement to provide progressive discipline, like providing written warnings or improvement plans to notify employees who do something that may violate policy. The effect of this law is that newly elected public officials can dismantle the infrastructure of government, firing employees who don't share their political views. Eliminating career service is also inefficient. It's better to tell employees what they're doing wrong and work to help them improve than firing them, and then investing state funds to recruit, hire, train, and nurture overtime rookie employees to take their place. This will cost $40 million to buy state employees out of their job protections. And the choice isn't well understood by employees. Their rights are only important when they face termination, which accounts for why there has been such a huge opt-in for this small increase in funds. Please, please don't dismantle career service. Thank you.
Jared Larson?
Yeah, you there now?
Yep, go ahead. Time's yours.
All right. Yeah. So I have worked for the state for 14 years. I've been a manager for 10. I'd like to express the issues I have with training. The only training I've had in management for 10 years is a 3-day training. That is it. I feel like HR has really failed. They've had the last year to do some training and they still haven't done any type of training. And of the individuals I've talked to that have signed up for the at-will status, the only individuals that are signing up for that are ones that are close to retirement, mainly over 25 years, and can leave when they want to, are the individuals that need the 5% to survive because of inflation. That's the only people that have been signing up for this. You know, how are we expecting to, just as I said earlier, poor performance, right? It brings everybody down, and it does. When our representatives keep trying to cut our benefits, you know what? It brings down the employees at the state. And, you know, we're trying to do the best we can, but if everything keeps getting cut and cut and we can't get decent raises to keep up with inflation, you know, right now we're losing all of our employees to city and counties because they pay higher. Nobody's there to stand up and say, look, enough's enough. We need to build the forces back up. You know, this
Your
right
time's
now.
up. Your time's up, sir. If you could just sum up real quick. Sir? Sir? Okay. All right. With that, that concludes our public comment. We'll come back to the committee for committee action. Representative Stoddard.
Motion to adjourn.
The motion is non-debatable. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. I rule that motion fails. Is there any other committee action? We need to do a roll call vote. Sorry, we got to go back to a roll call vote on that. Roll call vote on that last action. Page, go ahead.
Representative Bolander? Daley Provo? Yes. Gracious? No. Hayes? Yes. Malloy? No. Perucci? No. Stoddard?
Yes.
Thurston? Yes. Welton? Yes. Vice Chair Peterson? No. Chair Musselman?
No. That motion fails. We're still in debate or committee action. Representative Malloy.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to move favorably HB 412 state employee revisions with a favorable recommendation.
That motion be in order. The motion is to pass out with a favorable recommendation, HB 412 state employment revisions. Would you like to speak to that?
I'll wait.
Oh, wait, I apologize. I misstated. That would be second. We have to move the second sub first. We are going to run out of time.
Okay, I remove that motion and make a motion to adopt first substitute. Second substitute, HB 412 state employee revisions.
That motion is ordered. The motion is to adopt second substitute to HB 412 state employment revisions. Would you like to speak to that?
I'll waive.
Maker of the motion waives. Any comment from the committee on that motion? Seeing none. To the bill sponsor?
I'll waive.
Back to the maker of the motion for some?
Waive.
The motion is to adopt second substitute to HB 412 state employment revisions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I rule that motion passes unanimously. Back to the committee for further committee action. Representative Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to move first substitute HB 412 state employee revisions with a favorable recommendation.
That motion is ordered. The motion is to pass out.
Second substitute HB 412.
Thank you, Representative Malloy. That motion is in order. I'll place it. The motion is to pass out second substitute HB 412 state employment revisions. Would you like to speak to that?
Waive.
Motion maker waives. Representative Thurston.
Just briefly, I was a state employee from 2003 to 2019. The entire time I was a state employee, I was a Schedule A or at-will employee. And I never perceived in any way that my job was in danger or that I was diminished for being an at-will employee or that I lacked any protections. Through all that time, I felt supported by HR. I felt like that the system was fair and that it worked for me. And so I have a great deal of trust in our division to make sure that that same protection will be for any other employee that ends up in that system.
Representative Daily Provo.
Substitute motion.
That motion would be in order. State your motion.
I believe that this is too premature, that we passed out House Bill 104 last year. It's still being implemented, and like I said before, we cannot run a victory lap on this policy. And
Mr. Chair, point of order.
State your point of order, Representative Thurston.
She needs to state what her motion is.
I thought she did.
did I not state
I
that?
don't know.
I'm sorry, my
Go ahead.
motion is to hold the bill in committee.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead and proceed.
Yeah, just given that this policy has incredible potential impact, very possibly negative, that it's something that we should at least get a year under our belt with the first stage of it, have a chance to figure out how it's worked and perhaps re-examine it next year.
Back to the committee for comment on the motion to hold. Sorry, Representative Malloy, you get to respond to that first. Go ahead, Representative Malloy.
I would oppose the motion, the substitute motion.
To the committee for comment on the substitute motion to hold. Representative Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an appropriate motion. This is obviously a big change. As a former government employee, we need to get this right. I specifically, no offense to state employees, specifically did not go work for the state because they had the least amount of pay as an attorney and still do. I worry that with a policy like this, without giving the time to look into it and I understand our time constraints, but only allowing 1 minute for comment, that we're rushing into something. We don't have a good a retirement system as we thought we had. And I feel like if we just keep pulling things away, we're going to keep losing employees for the state. And as mentioned, we're going to be giving them to the counties and cities. I think holding is appropriate. We have more meetings this week. I would love some further debate, further discussion, and be able to actually hear from people and give them the appropriate time so we can understand this issue more fully.
Thank you, Representative Stoddard. I'll just make it, we're going to run out of time, Representative. Either way, this is probably going to land back here, so I promise you we will get it rescheduled. Is there any other further comment on the motion to hold? I'll restate that motion. The motion is to hold HB 412 state employment revision, actually for substitute 412 state employment revisions. Roll call vote.
Representative Bolander? Daily Provo? Gracious? Hayes? Malloy? Stoddard? Welton? Vice Chair Peterson? Chair Musselman?
Yes. That motion passes with Representative Peterson, Representative Greasus, Representative Malloy voting and nay. One more motion? Sorry? I can't hear.
Malloy was aye, correct? Did you vote yes to hold? No? Bolger did, I see.
Okay, so who was it that didn't vote?
Okay. I believe so. It was two. Yeah, I believe it was just two.
I'll restate that. The motion passed with 2 voting nay, Representative Peterson and Representative Greasus.
Malloy did.
And Representative, sorry, we're just clarifying. Representative Malloy was also a no vote. I'll entertain one more motion. Motion adjourned, not debatable. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.